What's up, guys? Toad back with another episode of Better Off Dead College Football Week 11. Last week, we did not do particularly well. It started out nice with the Arkansas outright win against Florida. That worked out pretty well, and then it was all downhill from there as the other two did not get there. Iowa State fell behind and tried to mount that comeback and were not able to do it against a Kansas team that I thought was in a pretty major letdown spot. And then I also liked the spot for Mississippi State, or I didn't like the spot that Kentucky was in, really. And that one wound up not really being close either, even though I think statistically that game was a bit closer than the final score indicated. But a couple of losses there, and we move on from that. And then I was going 1-1 most of the days throughout the week, which was not great. And I think 3-3 last Sunday or whatever. I don't even remember what it was. Kind of treading water, taking slight losses for a while until I got that win tonight with my one play on the Oklahoma City Thunder. Hopefully we'll pick it up with college football here. I think there are a lot of games that I kind of have somewhat of an opinion on, or wish that I had an opinion on, I guess, games that I could discuss a little bit and explain like what's keeping me off them or whatever. But I am going to have 4 plays. Hopefully I am able to shut up for once. Late night Toad in late night mode. I refuse to shut up, although that's me all the time. But these videos wind up going way long, so hopefully I can get through it. Got 4 plays to talk about, so let's get into it. Yeah, first play is going to be a Saturday afternoon, and this is the last one that I found when I was looking through the slate, and I'm like, yeah, I think I'm going to be on this one. Saturday noontime Eastern game. It's going to be on Georgia Tech plus 14. What's going on with this game? Why do I like Georgia Tech? It's more in a lot of these cases. It's more that I don't like who they're facing in that spot. But Georgia Tech is up against Clemson, and even though here I don't quite like what I'm seeing in the market as far as it looking like 66% of the tickets, but only 58% of the cash are on Georgia Tech. I'm not sure if that's actually accurate because it looks like the line has gone down a bit from Clemson minus 15 to the minus 14. I couldn't even find any 14 and a halves anywhere when I just looked, but I think the 14 is still fine right on that key number, even though you're not getting the hook. I grabbed the 14. And what do we got going on with this game? This is mostly play against Clemson, even though Clemson, both of these teams are 1 win away from bowl eligibility, but Clemson, I think that's a little bit less of a motivating factor here because Clemson's a team that they had much bigger aspirations to start the season. Those aspirations were kind of dashed fairly early on when they lost immediately to Duke, and then people kind of realized that maybe this team isn't what we thought they were, and then they proceeded to lose a couple more games. But even so they probably feel that maybe they have other opportunities to still gain that bowl eligibility. I don't know, but I think this is a sandwich spot anyway for Clemson, even though they do need that one more win for the bowl eligibility. They're coming off a big win against Notre Dame, a ranked Notre Dame team. They were able to win, I think, as a home underdog in that one by about 3. And then up after this, they have a ranked North Carolina team. So I don't love the spot here for Clemson. And I think the other factor here, you can see on my screen here, their star running back Shipley is supposed to come back. So I think we had the injured player theory a little bit in effect in their previous game as well, because he went down in that loss against NC State, which, if you remember, I was on. I thought that was a bad spot for Clemson in that one. They're sandwiched there between the close Miami game that I think might have been an overtime game or something, and then had the Notre Dame game coming up. So they dropped the game against NC State, and I think NC State was coming out of a bye and were able to take care of business there and actually win outright. I think as maybe a 10-point dog or something, because NC State hasn't really done that well. But Shipley for Clemson got injured in that game. So I think another factor that went to that Notre Dame game is he was out. So sometimes when you have that star player go down, it might affect the line a little bit. It would affect it more if he was a quarterback, but it affects it a little bit. But then I think the team kind of steps up in that first game without him. But then if you played a good game and you won in that game and he's set to come back now in this next game after that, I think I've explained the injured player theory a bunch of times in the reverse injured player theory here, but I think you kind of the team kind of gets a little bit complacent. I think, like, well, we just won without this guy. you might like take your foot off the gas like a little bit, and especially if it's up against a Georgia Tech team that you might not really be paying that much attention to. Nobody's really been paying that much attention to Georgia Tech, although silently they've been playing fairly well here in the ACC. And they're coming off a blowout win, although it's a win against Virginia, and I think Georgia Tech, because they have 5 wins on the season as well, I think they realize they have fewer chances to actually be able to gain that bowl eligibility. Bowl eligibility. Maybe they're eyeing that game against Syracuse as being it, but they probably don't want to let it get to that if they can help it either. So I thought they were in a letdown spot off of that big win over North Carolina, but they wound up going into Virginia and easily winning that game. And I think Virginia themselves were, I think they were in a bad spot as well. Virginia, they were coming off also beating North Carolina and losing a close one that I think went multiple overtimes at Miami. So they weren't in that great of a spot. Georgia Tech handled them, even though Georgia Tech was coming out of that win over North Carolina as well. Though I think Georgia Tech might have had a bye between those two, so I think they had a little bit of time off to maybe prepare. Although, when you're coming off such a big win like that, I don't know if you really use that to, or no, I guess they didn't. I don't know when these teams have their buys. They had it a couple weeks prior to that, so that's not correct. So they turned around right away. So that's even more impressive, I guess, for Georgia Tech, because they were able to turn around right away off of that win over North Carolina and beat Virginia team, even though Virginia's not good at all. But they were still able to take care of business. You're playing a named team in Clemson, though, and you still are sitting at that 5-win mark. And this is a Georgia Tech team that the way they started off the season, like I don't think they expected to become bowl eligible. I think maybe that was like their goal, like in the best case scenario, maybe was we might become bowl eligible, but now it's like right in front of them. So I think that's going to motivate them. And they're playing a named team in Clemson, even if Clemson is indeed having a down year. And they are getting a lot of points here, the 2 touchdowns. So I like it. I think Clemson is in a spot that looks a bit sandwichy to me, even though they also need that one additional win to gain that bowl eligibility. I think that's a little bit less of a factor for them than it is for Georgia Tech, because I think the bowl eligibility alone means more to Georgia Tech than it does to Clemson, because Clemson, that would be a disappointment even if they were to make a bowl at this point. Georgia Tech, I think that's kind of what their like ultimate goal was, like best case scenario, we'll make that bowl, some bowl. So that's what I like there. I like Georgia Tech getting all those points in that one. The next one, this is, oh boy, a team that I've said has been overhyped most of the season, but now I think the tides have turned, man. The tides have changed. I'm actually going to be on Colorado plus the 10.5, and this one, it looks like this could be a pros versus Joes scenario, where the Joes are kind of liking the Arizona side here, even though Arizona's laying a lot of points on the road. And I don't really know who this Arizona team is to be laying that many points on the road, but it looks like Arizona's got 61% of the tickets, but 53% of the cash is on Colorado as the pretty large home underdog. So after Colorado started that season way overhyped, which I thought they were, it looks like that TCU win looks pretty much no good at this point. TCU has not been very good this year, and they somehow made the championship game last year, which I think they overperformed to get there. But this year, they're certainly not as good. So that Colorado win really does not look very good, and they really don't have anything else impressive on their resume. So I think that hype has completely died. Now they've only won 1 game in the Pac-12, and people are just not going to want any part of them at this point. But the thing is, I don't want any part of Arizona in this spot. Arizona, like I keep expecting them to fall at some point because they have faced an absolute gauntlet, man. Like I expected it to happen in this Washington State game. It looked like it was kind of a down spot after they played Washington and USC, who were both top 10 ranked teams at the time, and Washington still is. They played Washington to within 7, took USC into some amount of overtimes, I think, and wound up losing by 2. Then off of that, they were still able to stay on the road for a second straight road game, beat Washington State, absolutely destroy them, although Washington State looks like they're actually not that good this year. Then they came back home, and they were able to win again against a ranked team, against Oregon State. And then last week, staying at home, They beat another ranked team and one of the names in the conference, UCLA. It's like something's got to give, man. You have 5 like max effort games in a row with, I think they did have a bye like mixed in there somewhere, but 5 huge effort games in a row. And now you finally come off of that and you get to play a Colorado team that's been losing all over the place and hasn't done anything right. And after this, you have Utah up next, another ranked team. And then you have your rival in Arizona State, even though Arizona State is certainly down this year, and they've taken that penalty where they're not allowed to make a bowl, even though they're not going to be bowl eligible anyway, because they're not going to be able to win enough games to even make that be a factor anyway. But this is like the one down spot left in Arizona's schedule. Like they've had 5 straight games against ranked teams, won the last 3 of them. They have another ranked team next, and then their in-state rival to finish the season. I think they could have overlooked this Colorado team. They have to go into elevation to do it. It's not really an easy place to play. In Colorado, I think finally the tides have shifted to the point where Colorado is no longer an overhyped commodity. They're no longer overvalued. I think they might be undervalued here. They're getting 10.5 points at home. Is that what I said I took? I think it's 10.5. Yeah. 10.5 points at home. And what are they coming off of? Well, yeah, they're coming off of a couple of games against ranked teams as well, sure. They lost to UCLA. They covered that game barely. And then I believe they also wound up covering at home against Oregon State. Still lost the game, but that was a game where they were losing 26-5, I think, pretty late in the game in the fourth quarter. So that game was kind of over. I don't think it was a game where it was like max effort out of Colorado and it was close the whole time. The game was pretty much over, and they got some garbage time points to cover the spread and kind of make it look cosmetic. So it's a pretty ugly game for them. They've had these ugly games, man. I think this is finally the point where I think they're going to actually play like a decent game again here. And they still, if they want to become bowl eligible, like after their hot start to the season, everybody would, like nobody would even think that Colorado might not even make a bowl at all. But I thought that it was certainly a possibility because their schedule is certainly not easy. And now, like, this is one of their last chances to do it. They probably don't expect that they're going to be able to do anything on the road against Utah in that final game. So they need to beat Arizona and beat Washington State, really. That's their only chance to get to that 6-win mark at this point. So I think this is going to be the spot where Arizona's in a spot where they might not be totally focused and they might overlook Colorado. Colorado might finally have a game where they're going to come. They're going to show up focused for this one. So I like it, and additionally to that, like there's a lot going on here. Arizona is a team, they just became bowl eligible, and I think they didn't really have high aspirations to start the season. Now they've vaulted into the rankings, so they're ahead of Colorado in the rankings. They're certainly the better team, but they're in the rankings now, in the top 25. They've got that 6th win, so now they know they're going to a bowl. So I think this has to be the spot where it's a letdown spot for Arizona. After you win 3 games in a row against ranked teams, you play 5 straight games against ranked teams, you're in the rankings now. You're a huge favorite on the road against a Colorado team that's been massively struggling since conference play started. Something's got to give. Like I keep saying, I think this is it. Like, this is not a good spot for Arizona, and it's a spot where Arizona's already got that bowl eligibility wrapped up. Colorado is still fighting. They're like fighting for their lives to even get it. If they still think that they can even get it at this point, I think it's got to be the spot where Colorado's got to be going all out for this one. I would have to think, and that's pretty much it. Although I would also say that the syllogistic angle here also kind of applies here, where I think bettors are going to look at this and see that Arizona just beat these common opponents here. They just beat Oregon State and UCLA, and Colorado just lost to both of those same teams. So I think people might look at that too and think, well, if Arizona can beat both of those teams and both of those teams beat Colorado, well, then Arizona's going to probably beat Colorado, right? And maybe beat them fairly easily and by this number here. I don't look at it that way. I think that's just maybe going to add more value to the Colorado side here. Didn't think I was going to be doing it the way the season started and the hype that's been going on with Colorado, but It's happening now. Finally, it's a buy low scenario, and it's a sell high scenario. Sell high on Arizona, buy low on Colorado, man. Finally, it's happening. Colorado plus 10.5. Ugh, I hate to do it, but it's happening. Next one is going to be the biggest number that I'm taking here, and it's I tend to not like to play numbers that are this big, but I think this is a situation that dictates it. It's going to be on Baylor plus 20.5 at Kansas State. Kansas State, you can see here, 82% of the tickets, but only 51% of the cash. So I think it is these numbers are indicating that there are some of the bigger bets on the Baylor side taking the points, and nobody's really going to want anything to do with Baylor here. And yeah, we're still in the Saturday afternoon slate here. Kansas State, though, man, they're in a spot where I don't like the spot they're in. I think this is a major sandwich for Kansas State. I don't like it at all. They just come off that game where they went to Texas, fought them tooth and nail, basically. They wound up losing by 3 in overtime to Texas. And if they'd won that game, they were looking at possibly, like, maybe we can win the Big 12 still. Like, that was still in sight for them. But now with that loss, that's pretty much, I think that's out of the equation now. That's like it's going to be a pretty major hangover spot for them, I think, after going all out, trying to beat the top team in your conference, and you wind up losing in overtime. That's tough. You have to face a Baylor team who's basically done nothing right. Nobody's paying attention to Baylor at this point, even though they do have a name that carries some weight. But this year, they have not really been doing anything. And who does Kansas State have next? Oh, yeah, they're going on the road to play their big in-state rival, who's now ahead of them in the rankings in Kansas. So that's a huge game as well. And Kansas State's already wrapped up their 6 wins. They're already bowl eligible, so that's not really going to be a factor here that much, I don't think. But coming off that huge game against Texas, that max effort where you just fell slightly short, and you have your major rival up next in Kansas, I think this Kansas State team could look right past Baylor. I think it's going to be, they think they're going to just try to get in, get out here. I think it's a bad spot for Kansas State. And for Baylor, I think this is a better spot, even though they played to overtime as well last week. They wound up losing pretty embarrassingly against Houston, who's one of the newcomers to the conference. Really, I think you lose a game like that, man, to Houston. You don't want to lose that game to a team that's considered to be like one of your little brothers in the state of Texas. You just lost to them at your own house. You have a ranked team coming in Kansas State. It's going to be the highest ranked, the best opponent that you have left on your schedule. I think you're going to have to be focused for this. And Baylor, of course, there is still the possibility of bowl eligibility if they somehow are able to win out, which I think is not totally out of the equation. But, well, I mean, they'd have to beat Kansas State as a gigantic underdog. So I think that's the main factor there, because I think these other 2 games left against TCU and West Virginia are more winnable than that, at least. So they probably don't think that they can actually do that. But even so, they might step it up just because this is one of the last games that they have against a pretty good opponents. They might want to put up a good showing. And they're coming off, like I said, a pretty embarrassing loss at home in overtime to an in-state little brother. I'm assuming Baylor was the favorite in that game, right? Were they? Yeah, only 2.5. But even so, I think it's an embarrassing loss. I think something's got to happen here. Kansas State is in a really bad sandwich spot, so I like it. I like Baylor getting all those points. I'll take some of these gigantic dogs like this, even though it's a situation where the favorite is so much better. They might be able to dictate the score, so it's a little bit dangerous. But when it's such a bad spot for Kansas State, I think it's a gigantic sandwich spot for them. I have to do it. I have to be on Baylor, taking all those points. So that's going to be that. And then finally, the last one. This is going to be the ugliest one, man. This is so bad. It's almost hard to do it. Central Florida, UCF plus 2.5. And what do we have going on in this one? And I think there might have been some 3s out there that I missed out on, but I still like this, even though it looks like the market is a little bit against it right now. But they're hosting Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State's got 71% of the tickets, according to this, but 80% of the cash. And it looks like the number has gone up. I don't know where this opener of 1.5 came from, but up. Maybe it was like a week-old line or something, up to 2.5. I think it has been 3, like, briefly, although I didn't see any of the 3s. I still kind of like it at 2.5. I think Oklahoma State is in a really bad spot. I think they're in a huge letdown spot here. Oklahoma State, I think everybody knows what they're coming off of. They're coming off not only beating their in-state rival as an underdog of about a touchdown, they beat Oklahoma, a huge win, huge emotional win. But not only that, but it's there's some added weight to that because I think that's going to be the last iteration of that rivalry game, bedlam between Oklahoma and Oklahoma State, because Oklahoma is piecing out of the Big 12, and I believe they're going to be headed to the SEC. So Oklahoma State, that is a huge win for them. They get to basically shut the door on Oklahoma's Big 12 tenure basically by beating them in that massive rivalry game. So I don't know what Oklahoma State's going to have left here at this point, even though they are still playing to win the Big 12, yes. But after that, this is a huge letdown spot, I would have to think. They have to go on the road, not only on the road, but to an unfamiliar place to play in UCF, because UCF, man, they're new to the Big 12, and it's not a spot where these teams are in like the Southwest, basically. Now they have to go over to Florida. That's kind of an odd spot to have to be in there. They're not familiar with that. It's unfamiliar territory. So I think it's all around a pretty bad spot for Oklahoma State. UCF, they've been really ugly, in conference, but they finally were able to get an in-conference win, but it was against one of the other conference newcomers in Cincinnati, who has not won a game yet in conference. But even so, I think that could be a little bit of a momentum builder finally for UCF, because they played so poorly up until then. They lost a bunch of these games, and it wasn't really to... I mean, they had a couple of games here that at least could have been winnable, and it just did not happen. But finally, I think with that win at Cincinnati, I think finally UCF might... that might be like a momentum starter for them. That might end their negative momentum and allow them to kind of take a positive away from that. And now they have a ranked team coming to their house, so it's probably a game they're going to want to step up for and play. And they still have bowl eligibility in sights because they played some easy opponents early in the season. I think it qualifies. I think if they win this game, they have a game at Texas Tech next, which I don't think is quite an auto loss. And then they have Houston at home to finish the season, another one of the Big 12 newcomers. So if they win 2 out of the last 3, they'll actually become bowl eligible. So I think they're going to be focused on this, man. And Oklahoma State, in a major letdown, coming off that huge win over their main rival in Oklahoma. I think the spot only lines up on UCF here. It's very negative for Oklahoma State, and it's much more positive for UCF here. And if anything, it's possible Oklahoma State go into that unfamiliar territory, but they're going to Orlando, which is also kind of a party city. That could be some amount of distraction there for these college kids. Oklahoma State, they might be still celebrating that win they just had over their main rival in Oklahoma. They might be trying to continue that party a little bit in Orlando. I think it's a dangerous spot. And finally, I would point out that I think this line just looks like a trap. It looks way too easy to take Oklahoma State, because how could Oklahoma State, who's near the top of the Big 12, in a ranked team, 7-2, 5-1 in conference, how are they laying less than a field goal against UCF, who's only won 1 game in conference, and it was against Cincinnati, and they're under 500 on the season, and their schedule has been not that difficult, really. The out-of-conference schedule, I don't think, was very difficult. Who's going to want it? It looks way too easy to play Oklahoma State, essentially to just win the game. I think it looks like a trap, so I'm going to do it. I'm on it, as ugly as it is, and how difficult it is to even think about it, think about doing it. I like it. I'm going to be on Central Florida, plus 2.5. That's going to do it for the 4 actual plays. One more time, Georgia Tech plus 14, Colorado plus 10.5, Baylor plus 20.5, and UCF plus 2.5. Those are the official Toad endorsed plays. And I mean, what else do we got on the schedule here? I don't really know. Alabama, they're laying 11 on the road at Kentucky. And they have 86% of the tickets, but it looks like only 85% of the cash. I might only look Kentucky's way in that one, even though Alabama's certainly the much better team. Alabama's coming off a pretty decisive win in a big, much hyped game over LSU that was maybe supposed to be a little bit closer than the final was. So I would probably only look to Kentucky's way in that one. Florida State kind of has a tough matchup here against Miami. Florida, I mean, that's an in-state rivalry there where Miami has kind of been on the negative side. They've been on the little brother side of it for a while now, I would have to say. And it looks like Miami's getting 61% of the cash, but 68% of the tickets are on Florida State, and Florida State's gone down from 15 to 14.5. So even though I don't think there's that much scheduling-wise that factors into that, I think the market at least is kind of indicating there might be some value taking Miami there. Miami's people have seen them make some very public mistakes, like that one against Georgia Tech, and probably don't want to take them here. But Miami still has a pretty decent defense, so that could allow them to stay within a couple scores of a Florida State team there. So that's the way I would look in that one. NC State at Wake Forest. This is a tough one, man, because I don't like the spot for NC State very much, but it does look like they're getting 73% of the cash, while 51% of the tickets are somehow on Wake Forest there. That's kind of a weird one, I think, with NC State laying 2.5. It almost looks too easy to take NC State there. And NC State, they're coming off a couple of nice wins in a row. They beat Clemson, which I mentioned, which pretty big win as a big underdog there, and that was coming off of an in-state rivalry game against Duke where they really didn't show up at all. They went into a bye, turned it around, came out of the bye, beat Clemson as a 10-point dog or whatever, who's still a named team. Then they stayed at home and they were able to beat Miami, who's been playing, even though they've been making mistakes, like I said, they've been playing fairly well this year, so that's a decent win as well. They go to Wake Forest next. I'm telling you, man, if North Carolina was their next opponent, then it might be a sandwich spot, and then I might actually be on Wake Forest there. But I do think it's still kind of a letdown spot for NC State here, and I think they might still overlook Wake Forest. And NC State, more importantly, that last win they got against Miami was to become bowl eligible. So I think that's kind of what their season has been about at this point. So they have the 6th win. They're bowl eligible now, going to Wake, and Wake, they're still in need of becoming bowl eligible, man. Wake, even though they played a rival in Duke last week, I think they have a couple extra days off because I think that was a midweek game, whereas NC State played on a Saturday. Wake, they need 2 more wins to become bowl eligible, and they know they're probably not going to win at Notre Dame in the next game, so I think they're going to probably be focused, and they realize they need to win against NC State here, and then possibly they'll be able to win at Syracuse, who's the bottom team in the ACC, a winless team in the ACC, which could put Wake Forest in a bowl to finish the season. So I think they do still have their sights set on that, and a little added motivation I think would be that NC State has kind of played their bigger brother, an in-state bigger brother, because they're both North Carolina teams for a while now in football. NC State's had the upper hand there, so I think that might motivate Wake Forest a little bit more. With Wake Forest, you have NC State coming to town there. I think that's going to motivate Wake Forest, just a little bit more. And NC State might have their foot off the gas just a little bit because they're coming off of some big wins and just became bowl eligible. So that's the way I would look at that one. I don't know why the market seems to be indicating somewhat strongly against it, because I do like Wake in that one. And then what else are we looking at here? Mississippi at Georgia is certainly a big game. Georgia's laying 10.5, it looks like, and 63% of the tickets, but only 61% of the cash. I don't know, because both of these teams, I think, are coming off close calls to some degree. Georgia was playing Missouri pretty close into the fourth quarter. Missouri was playing them pretty close into the fourth quarter until Georgia was able to pull away a little bit, but still didn't win by that much. I think 9, and Missouri still covered against them, so Georgia's coming off a little bit of a close call, so that they might have looked past Missouri a little bit, knowing that they had this game against Mississippi coming up, and they had just beaten Florida, who's, even though they're down a bit, that's one of Georgia's main rivals. So that Missouri team, even though they're ranked, doesn't really carry as much name recognition, I don't think. So Georgia might have taken them a little bit lightly. They probably won't take Ole Miss as lightly, especially coming off that kind of scare against Missouri. But Ole Miss, They also are coming off kind of a scare against Texas A&M, who's not doing quite that well this year. So I don't know how I would look at this. Mississippi did go into overtime against them as well, but I think I tend to look at it as like both of these teams are kind of coming off of scares to some extent. So I don't know what to think about this, but Georgia I think is certainly the better team, and I don't think Mississippi has really quite faced a team that plays defense as well as Georgia does. I mean, not many teams do. So that's the way I would look at that one there. It would just be a very slight lean, I guess, to Georgia if there would be any lean there at all. I don't even know because the market seems to be kind of indicating against it somewhat, a little bit there. And then I don't know what else we got here that I can comment on. Well, Washington, of course, they're coming off of a monster win against USC, and that win feels like it's a bigger game than this game against Utah, even though Utah's ranked higher than Washington is. Utah's coming off, I think, like a big-time blowout win over Arizona State, I think. Kind of just a cakewalk. So they kind of had like a tune-up type of game, whereas Washington had to go all out and beat USC in a pretty hyped game. And for some reason, it just feels, because USC carries that weight with their name, it just feels like that was a bigger game against USC. And it was a fairly close game. Washington was on the road, I believe, and they came out of there with a win, a big win, remaining undefeated and taking care of one of their rivals in the Pac-12 there. And now they got this game against Utah where they're up to a 9.5-point favorite. It looks like it might even be going towards 10, or maybe it has been at 10 at some spots. 75% of the tickets, but 77% of the cash looks like it's on Washington. I'm not sure if I buy that. I think Washington's certainly going to be the public team because they have Penix, man. They have that high-flying offense. It's what the recreational bettors like. They like teams that score a ton of points. That is Washington. I think Utah is the better defensive team, however, and you can see the total has also gone down as well, 54.5 to 51, with 85% of the tickets on the under, even though 85% of the cash, but 58% of the tickets on the over. So it looks like there is some money driving that total down on the under. So I think some bettors might be expecting, or professional bettors might be expecting this to be a little bit of a lower scoring game than the public might expect here with that Washington offense. So that would point me in the direction of Utah, the better defensive team who is getting points as well. So I think that's the only way I would look in that one. Utah's coming off a game where they didn't have to put in much effort. The game was over like pretty soon after it started. Washington coming off that major barn burner against USC, that high scoring game. So the public would probably be looking to Washington there. I would tend to look in the other direction a bit. And then on the other side of that one, USC, man, they just seem like such a defeated team after that, with Caleb Williams, I think, is their quarterback, just crying in his mother's arms or whatever. It's like, be a man, come on. I know it was a huge emotional game, and really that game is just, that's kind of the nail. Like I already said that USC was already facing a dream crusher situation when they lost when they had that second loss that ended their hopes of making the college football playoffs. I think that was originally what USC intended to do on the season. That's gone, but now they didn't win in their own house against Washington, which was a big step-up game for them because Washington's the highest-ranked team in the Pac-12, still undefeated. They're leading the Pac-12, and USC almost had that game, and they fell short. I think it's going to be tough for them to turn back around, but they're playing Oregon, who's the other top team in the conference, and another very highly ranked team. And 74% of the tickets on Oregon, but only 57% of the cash on Oregon. I don't know, because even though it looks like Oregon's gone up from 14 to 14.5 as the home favorite, the cash discrepancy looks like it's actually kind of on the USC side in the market, but there's no way I would want to take USC coming off that huge game against Washington that I think they're only going to be hung over. That was their third loss, so they're really like, I think they might have still been in the running, like still had hopes to maybe potentially make the Pac-12 championship. I think that might have still been possible if they were able to beat Washington. I think they might have had to beat Washington and Oregon to make it happen, but it was still like a possibility. Now it's not. Now it's gone. They just look so defeated with their quarterback getting all emotional at the end of that. I would not want to be on this USC team here. Oregon, I mean, I think they have USC coming into their house. I think they'll be focused. It's a big name team that's still a good team with a good offense that's been ranked all season. Oregon has the better defense, though, and they're the much more physical team, which I think USC is going to have some problems facing a physical team like that. Like Utah, I think, is a pretty physical team as well, and Utah beat USC, I believe, but Oregon has an even more physical defense, a better defense than that. Probably the best defense in this conference, I would say. So I would only look towards Oregon there, even though the market looks like it has some indicators going against it. I would not want any part of USC coming off that game. And Oregon, I don't even know what they're actually coming off of. What did Oregon even do last week? They had like a cakewalk game, kind of an easy game against Cal, and I think Cal was coming off some like fairly big game of theirs. I think that might have been the Cal game against USC, maybe where they played them really close, something like that. I don't even know. But yeah, at any rate, I would not want any part of USC in that one. Tennessee, Missouri is a little bit interesting because Missouri's coming off, like I mentioned, that game where they took Georgia into the fourth quarter, man. They were only down 3 in that game in the fourth quarter. So that was a game where Missouri definitely stepped it up. And you can see here they have 56% of the tickets on them, but 57% of the cash on Tennessee. Although it looks like Tennessee's gone down maybe from 2.5 to 2. I would only look to Tennessee here, I think, because Missouri's coming off such a big game. Tennessee had kind of a tune-up. They blew out UConn there. So they might be focused for this one on Missouri, knowing that Missouri's like a ranked team, and Missouri did play tough, played Georgia tough in the last one, so Tennessee might have an eye on that. Tennessee certainly had to put in much less effort in their previous game to get through UConn, and very easy win there. Almost functions as like a bye for them, really. When Missouri had a really tough max effort game where they fell just short against Georgia. So it's going to be tough for Missouri to turn back around and have to play right away here, even though they are at home and they are playing a big name ranked team in Tennessee in the SEC there. So that's the one thing that kind of keeps me off of wanting to play Tennessee just a little bit there. And then what else we got here? Arkansas, as you know, I was on them last week. They had a nice win as an underdog that went into overtime. They were winning the game early by, I think, 14 early on, and let the whole thing slip, and then wound up having to win in overtime. But a big win as like a 6-point dog at Florida. Even though Florida's a little bit down, still a big win for Arkansas. I think I would have to lean against them coming off that game. They're playing Auburn here. I don't know what Auburn did last week. Auburn played Vandy, not a big game at all, and we're able to beat them. So I would kind of only look to go against Arkansas there, and it does look like 60% of the cash, but only 52% of the tickets on Auburn. Auburn might still have that name that carries a little bit more weight than Arkansas does, and Arkansas does have an ugly record, as I mentioned when I played them last week, but their schedule has definitely been tougher than their record indicates. But even so, coming off that nice big upset that went into OT against Florida, that was a bigger effort game, so I think it's going to be tough for Arkansas to turn around right away and play Auburn. I would only look to Auburn there, and it looks like the line is ticked down from Arkansas being a 3-point favorite to being a 2.5. I would try to still find 3s if they're out there on Auburn. If you wanted to play that. Florida, LSU, man, there are so many games that I have at least somewhat of an opinion on, at least. Florida, LSU, this looks like 62% of the tickets on LSU, but 73% of the cash on the other side on Florida, and that's the only way I would look here. LSU, they've gone down from 14 to 13.5 with some juice. Maybe there's still some 14s out there. I don't know, but it looks like there's a lot of market indicators on Florida here. They have the higher cash percentage, the big cash discrepancy there, and it looks like there's a reverse line movement, bringing the line down a bit on LSU, going against where the public is. LSU is coming off that game against Alabama, man, that much hyped game, and LSU just was not able to get there, and I think that was LSU's third loss on the season, and LSU is a team that I think they come into the season, they were highly ranked, and they did have to play, I think, Florida State right away, which is a huge game, and there's no shame in losing a game to a team that's as good as Florida State, but even so, that's a rough way to have to start the season with a loss already on your record. Now that they have a third loss. I believe this is their second loss in the SEC because I think their other one was to Ole Miss maybe in that game where I think LSU was winning that game by 9 pretty late in the game and let that slip, and that was just tough. They lose to Ole Miss in that one, I think. I might be talking out of my ass. Do I remember that correctly? Hopefully I do. I think I do. So that's their third loss on the season, so I think that's kind of devastating to them. That was a game where they stepped up. That's a step-up game. Coming off of that, and then having to face Florida, who even though Florida went into OT against Arkansas, that's a game where Florida was favored. Florida, that's just kind of a rough way to lose. You lose like to an Arkansas team that's not really as good as you. Kind of an ugly way to lose for Florida there. So LSU, I don't know what is left for them to really play for here after that Alabama game, a big game, and they lose second loss in conference. They're really not going to do anything, and they already have the 6th win to be bowl eligible, so I don't know. There's not that much left for them to really play for, and Florida is a named team, but even so, Florida, when they lost that Arkansas game, the reason I went against Florida, though, is because they were in such a sandwich spot coming off that big game against Georgia and the cocktail party. Huge rivalry, and they had this game against LSU up next, and Missouri and Florida State, so all ranked opponents left. Florida only needs one more. They need one more win to become bowl eligible, and it's going to be tough to find that win against 3 good opponents, so I think they're still playing for that bowl eligibility, man. Even though I think Florida did have higher aspirations on the season, so, excuse me, maybe it doesn't quite mean as much, but I think they still want that. It's still a big opponent that you're facing here, in LSU, going to their house. So I think Florida might be focused on that, whereas LSU might have a little bit of a hangover effect. It might be in a bit of maybe even like kind of a sort of dream crusher-ish scenario there. So I would only look to take Florida with the points there. Oklahoma, I don't think I'd want any part of them coming off that game that I mentioned where they lost to Oklahoma State. I think that dealt Oklahoma their second loss. So if they had any hopes of, I think they might still be in it for the Big 12. I'm not even sure. But if they had any hopes of, because they did beat Texas, so that was big for them. But even so, I think getting that second loss, like they're not going to be able to make the college football playoffs, at least. I don't know if they thought that they could prior to that, but that's a big loss in their final Bedlam game there against a rival like that. Now you have to go and face a West Virginia team who's just not that great. Oklahoma might not be a totally focused team there. They've got 57% of the tickets, but 71% of the cash is going against them, on West Virginia. And Oklahoma, it looks like they've gone up maybe a little bit from 12 to 12.5, but I don't know if I quite buy that. The market discrepancy, the cash discrepancy does look like it's heavily in favor of West Virginia there, and I would agree with that. I think Oklahoma is only kind of in a letdown spot there after that huge game. West Virginia's coming off, I think, kind of an easy win over BYU. BYU's not good this year, so they had a much easier game last week. So I think they're going to be in a better position to be focused here on this game. So that's the way I would lean there, would be to West Virginia taking the points. Texas is at TCU. They got 96% of the cash, but 90% of the tickets. I don't know if that's accurate, but Texas is certainly going to be a public team here, and they're laying 10 on the road at TCU. And TCU is a team that's just looked very ugly this season. I don't know what they did last week, but TCU really has not been doing well. Actually, yeah, they lost on a Thursday game at Texas Tech. Maybe they might have had one eye looking ahead here to Texas, but TCU, I mean, they need to change something, man. They're sitting at 4 wins, so there is still the potential that they could still possibly become bowl eligible if they win this game, because I think they probably know they can beat Baylor in the next game, so that might have them focus here. They're facing Texas, who's the biggest team in-state, their biggest in-state big brother there. It's going to be a step-up game for TCU. They still have a shot at the bowl eligibility there, as remote a chance as that might be. They're coming off that ugly loss against Texas Tech, but that was midweek, so they have extra time to prepare for this, a couple days extra. Texas is coming off that game where went into overtime, kind of a barn burner type of game, a tough battle, close game against Kansas State there. Texas, I think, is in the worst spot there. I would only look to TCU there. some of these leads are kind of strong, man. It almost feels like I should be on some of these other games, but yeah, that's the only way I would look in that one, and maybe that'll finally wrap it up. Maybe I'll finally shut up and let you guys go until you guys watch my NFL game. Yeah, I think we'll wrap it there. We'll do it. We'll do it there. One more time for you. We're at 45 minutes. It's not too bad, too bad. And hopefully I'm giving you some extra information there that you can take and look at it. But I'm on Georgia Tech plus 14, Colorado plus 10.5, Baylor plus 20.5, and UCF plus 2.5. Situationally, I think those are the ones that stood out the most to me. So that's going to be it until my NFL video, which I'm going to do in a little while. Always late nights, late Wednesday nights with Toad, man. Hopefully you don't hate me that much. But I'm Toad. Better Off Dead is this show. I'm also one of the hosts of the Tower Gang podcast. I'm Tower Gang Toad on Twitter. Tower Gang podcast is the most offensive, most hilarious podcast on the planet. We just had a pretty hilarious episode that we just did tonight. Just the boys. I love my homies there. You can find us on YouTube, Odyssey, Spotify, Rumble. And we're on Locals if you want to support us at towergang.locals.com. And finally, I will also shout out, because I feel like I have to keep doing it because they gave me some mention in one of their blog posts. The guys at flapper.net, FLAPPR.net. They are, like me, they're political. They're in the political shit posting arena. They're funny guys. We're all kind of in the politics / comedy and / sports sphere. So they do some blogging about sports as well, and we're all in the booby sphere. Let's be real about it. We love the ladies and their attributes and their assets. So flapper.net, they're good guys over there. Give them a follow. Once again, I'm Tower Gang Toad. Until my NFL video in a little while, peace out.